Ukraine has once again suffered a series of massive attacks by the Russian Federation, which have shaken the entire country. And furthermore, Volodymyr Zelensky personally denounces that one of these attacks was carried out by the Russian army directly against a kindergarten. In Kharkiv, in particular, 50 children were evacuated. Western media are already talking about it. A real tragedy, of course. But all of this raises many questions. And here we are, precisely to analyze the facts in detail and determine what really happened, how it could have been avoided. What global consequences will this have? Stay until the end, because the answers to these three questions will not only surprise you, but will also give you the main keys to understanding the Ukrainian conflict, and above all, its possible outcome. And I'll tell you more. They'll open up another perspective on this war for you. Let's get started. A very important message before we begin. From here, I neither support nor intend to normalize. In fact, I strongly condemn all kinds of attacks against the civilian population, and of course, especially against children. Children should never have to suffer the consequences of adults' actions. And yes, this also includes the attacks carried out on Ukrainian territory. Now then, let's analyze the facts of this particular attack, because the truth is that on one hand, it raises a lot of questions, and on the other hand, it offers many answers to some questions that have been open for quite a while. Now, let's get to the facts. Lately, the attacks by the Russian Federation against Ukrainian territory have only been intensifying, and among other things, this has quite a lot to do with the fact that, actually, Ukraine itself is increasingly intensifying its attacks against Russian territory. For example, the latest targets have been in Makhachkala and Bataisk, and they have mostly been civilian targets. In any case, one of the main attacks and one of the most widely reported, without a doubt, in Western media, and of course, also in Ukrainian media. Right now, this alleged attack by the Russian Federation against a kindergarten, from which 50 children had to be evacuated, is being reported. Oh, a ball. Western media, of course, echoed this news. The images speak for themselves and appeared on the front pages of the vast majority of them, of course in the Ukrainian media as well. Vladimir Zelensky himself reported this from Sweden, which is a key detail. A Russian drone attacked a kindergarten in Kharkiv following a night of heavy assaults. Sadly, one person has died. My condolences to the family. So far, 7 people have been injured. They are receiving medical care. All the children have been evacuated and are in shelters. According to preliminary information, many are experiencing an acute stress reaction. There is no justification, nor can there be any justification, for the drone attack on a kindergarten. It's clear that Russia is becoming more brazen. These attacks are a slap in the face from Russia to everyone who insists on a peaceful solution. Bandits and terrorists can only be put in their place with force. The position of the Kiev regime is therefore extremely clear, crystal clear, I would say. And here we need to highlight several underlying details of the matter, which will help us understand much better what may have actually happened. In the general context, by the way, we have events of tremendous relevance. On one hand, there's still the possibility of a meeting between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, which neither the Kiev regime nor its European Union partners like. On the other hand, we have the fact that Melania Trump has recently become very concerned about the issue of children, a fact for which she was even personally thanked. Vladimir Putin, he dedicated an important part of his conversation with Donald Trump to this, and Donald Trump himself echoed it. Thirdly, there's the geographical fact. Where is Vladimir Zelensky right now? He's on his tour of the European grandmother, because the meeting in the United States with Donald Trump was clearly an absolute failure. And here we reported it in 2 different ways, explaining in detail the reasons behind these events and exactly where they lead us. There he is, particularly in Sweden, asking for more fighter jets and, in fact, having already signed a contract for them. We will analyze this a little later. But the key message from Ukraine regarding this issue, or this context, whichever you prefer, is: should we be tougher on the Russian Federation? It doesn't understand anything except force. In other words, no to negotiations, no to peace. We have to continue with the war. This is absolutely key on one hand, and absolutely contradictory to his own words. Donald Trump himself, who recently, in fact, if I'm not mistaken, in his very meeting with Zelensky, responding to journalists, spoke about the fact that these supposed Russian attacks on civilian targets mostly result in soldiers being the victims.
Putin, did you talk about his ongoing attacks on civilian areas in Ukraine? They said you cited the article in good faith.
Most soldiers, the soldiers dead and unbelievable. 5,000, 7,000, you believe, look at that, and I say it's pretty amazing. But in the case of attacks on Kiev in some places, the largest number of human soldiers has been shown. Battlefield A.
This message from Donald Trump, who appears unconcerned about the alleged Russian attacks, supposedly, pardon the redundancy, on civilian targets. And indeed, maybe we should take it with a grain of salt, because Donald tends to change his mind quite a lot. We should also add another message from a Ukrainian opposition figure, the blogger and journalist Anatoly Sary, who, by the way, is not suspicious at all. He is pro-Russian, though, and very critical of the Kiev regime. I'm writing this here because maybe it will help. According to my information, yesterday the data for the Russian Federation was transmitted by the armed forces of Ukraine, and this data has to do with targets that are supposed to be in Poltava. We're talking about strategic targets, but there are no soldiers or equipment there, only civilians. So, does that mean someone has deliberately given the Russian Federation incorrect data, essentially to stage a provocation? Everything, therefore, is already organized to achieve, as a result, an extremely sad image that is mainly directed at the United States. This has happened more than once, and I hope that this time the Russian Federation will actually review and confirm the data. Yes, it's true that Anatoly Sary, in his very recent publication A Todo Esto from October 21, specifically talks about this. But who can assure us that the Kiev regime couldn't do exactly the same thing in any other region? And now, that's right. In addition to all these touches and all these details, within the global context of the alleged attack by the Russian Federation, let's analyze the attack itself. We see the building of the supposed kindergarten, which is practically in ruins. Vladimir Zelensky, do you remember? He said it was a drone attack? Yes, most likely. These are indeed the facts. Because a missile from the Russian Federation, this two-story building, which is a very small target, would have been completely destroyed, wiped off the face of the earth. But let's continue analyzing the images. On one side, we see the destroyed building, and on the other, we have the firefighters evacuating the children. It really draws a lot of attention. There's one image in particular, 3 firefighters perfectly lined up, each carrying a child. It's almost like the perfect image for the headlines of Western media. And what a surprise when we confirmed or found out that Western collective media actually wrote about this event. It's actually the most commonly used image. Come on, it's as if it had been specifically prepared for this purpose. The children and the attack itself, if it's true, of course, it hurts me. And I want to emphasize it once again in a special way, first of all as a mother, because my own son is less than a year old. But the children in the images, first of all, and of course, thank God. But they appear without any apparent injuries. But above all, what really stands out is the clothing they are wearing. Supposedly, they had to be evacuated quickly and in a hurry from inside that kindergarten that had just been attacked. And not only do they not have any traces of dust, nor does it seem like they've ever set foot in what we see in the images, this building turned to rubble, but they're also wearing clothes perfectly suited for the weather. I mean, it seems like someone has had enough time. They've taken the trouble to dress them before taking them out to the street. which, in such an extreme situation, just doesn't make sense. Did they get dressed at home? I mean, of course. And just to be clear, this doesn't rule out the attack or lead us to any concrete conclusion, but I think I'm asking myself the necessary analytical questions to understand the situation. And there's one more thing. A military analyst from the Russian Federation, Yuri Podolyaka, recently spoke about this topic, referring to the testimonies of the citizens of the city of Kharkov themselves, which had supposedly reached him in private. I'll read it. Strike attack is understood to be at the kindergarten in Kharkov, linked to the location. Thanks to my viewers from Kharkov, who quickly located the filming site. So, the strike was at the official address, 5 Korcharskaya Street. However, it's not clear whether it was a strike or if someone dropped something on Kharkov, and it fell unfolded. But that's not the point. There's a different point. From there to the nearest kindergarten is 700-800 meters, 2 big blocks. That is to say, to call this strike a strike on the kindergarten, an attack on the kindergarten, you have to have a very strong imagination, and the representatives of the Nazi regime in Kyiv clearly have it. As the deputy of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, which is the parliament, Mariana Bezugla, wrote in her blog, there are no words. We have therefore analyzed the context and the facts themselves, but we still have the 2 most important parts left, the keys to all of this, which answer the questions of what really happened in Kharkiv, what could have happened, or rather, and secondly, and above all, what consequences does this have on a global level? What does it tell us? Let's break it down step by step. My physical presence in Donbass, carrying out my work here as a war correspondent, and, therefore, my very close and daily contact with soldiers of the Russian Federation. They aren't in vain this time either, so I have spoken with them to determine what the possible theories are about what could have happened in Kharkov today. And also, we are going to analyze this with complete objectivity, 100% objectivity. There are 2 main currents, or 2 main theories, namely, that it was indeed an attack carried out by the Russian Federation, or that the incident itself might not even have been an attack. But above all, it has nothing to do with Russian involvement in it. Within both groups, there are also subgroups, which we will detail from here on. So, we arrive at the first possibility, that it was an attack by the Russian Federation. And here, 3 options open up for us. That it was a Russian attack and also intentional, that it was an accident, or that it was a Russian attack. Yes, but not on a kindergarten as the Kyiv regime wants us to believe. In the first case, and having discussed it extensively with the military of the Russian Federation, it should be mentioned that the attack, as stated by Vladimir Zelensky himself, was carried out using a drone. This is an attack on a building, we've seen it in the photos, that is very small and also located in a very densely populated and, therefore, very densely built city. That is, it's a small target and therefore quite difficult to hit for a drone of these characteristics. What are the ideal targets for the Garant? They tell me, I repeat, the military themselves, that they should be a bit bigger and, if possible, also a bit more isolated. And to this, of course, we should add the logical question, what exactly does the Russian Federation gain by attacking a civilian target? Moreover, a civilian target that involves children, especially in the context. Given the current international context, I would say it's actually quite favorable to the Russian Federation. The second scenario, which could be a Russian attack, but initially aimed at another target. But as a result of the work, whether it's electronic warfare, Ukrainian or the air defense of the same country, the drone veered off course and accidentally crashed into the kindergarten. There's little else to add. Accidents happen, unfortunately, especially when it comes to an armed conflict. The third scenario, by the way, is actually much more interesting. And in some way, we've already mentioned it before when we read these statements by Yuri Podolka, the military analyst from the Russian Federation. And it's because, according to what she says, the civilian population of Kharkov itself, she says that it's not a kindergarten, and that the building that was hit must be of some other kind, since the nearest kindergarten is about 700–800 meters from the impact site. So Russia could have attacked, yes, intentionally as well. But instead of carrying out its attack against a civilian target, what it attacked could have been a target of a different nature. We won't know the truth, since the Kyiv regime, in this third scenario, will never reveal it to us, would reveal it. But there we face the setbacks we already mentioned in scenario number 1. It's a Garant drone and an extremely small target for it, especially when it comes to making a precise impact. The second possibility, or rather group of possibilities, because in this case there are two different options. It has to do with the fact that it wasn't directly related to any attack carried out by the Russian Federation. In other words, Russia would have never targeted that place as a target. And so, what possibilities does that open up for us? On one hand, it could have been hit. Yes, but by a Ukrainian air defense missile. This, in fact, already happened in 2024, among many other occasions. But in that particular case, it also had to do with children. The images were absolutely dramatic, a real tragedy. But it turns out that what the Kiev regime initially also labeled as a precise and calculated attack by the Russian Federation, with the intention of creating as much chaos and causing as much damage as possible. Later, it was completely disproved by images from the scene, where it was clear that what hit that Amayet clinic, a children's medical center, was in fact a NATO missile, particularly an air defense missile, most likely a Patriot. On the other hand, of course, it might not be any kind of accident, but rather a setup directly carried out and organized in a cold and calculated way by the Kyiv regime, with the intention, on one hand, of attracting global media attention, as many people as possible, as many international leaders as possible, of course, to the Ukrainian cause, and secondly, to attract the attention of Donald Trump personally, because his last meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky was not at all successful for the latter. His relations with Vladimir Putin, it seems, are now going through rather good times. So Ukraine could use these images and this montage to try to worsen, on the one hand, the image of the Russian Federation internationally, in particular, the relations between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Here, in addition, it should be especially mentioned that this is happening with the recent ones. It's unclear if these were attacks or just explosions, possibly sabotage, that happened in the European Union a few days ago. We talked about this in great detail during the live broadcast we did just yesterday on the channel. All the facts are there. But anyway, that these attacks or explosions in question would take place in Hungary, where Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump were supposedly going to meet. And now, this is also compounded by another rather unfavorable fact that, at least apparently, could be aimed precisely at postponing the meeting as much as possible, or even, if possible, canceling the meeting in question. The conclusions about what may have happened in Kharkov are up to you, because we're here to do the analysis. And the most important part of it, without a doubt, is the consequences this will have at the international level. Or, so to speak, the conclusions we draw from this attack. And here we can highlight 3 conclusions in particular. First of all, taking into account the international context in which we are currently immersed, and also the information from Ukrainian sources themselves, such as the ones we mentioned at the beginning of this video. Most likely, and of course, much to my regret, this will by no means be an isolated incident, but from now on, we may have to face more and bigger provocations carried out by the Kyiv regime to try, by any means, to distract media attention. On one hand, to change the United States agenda, and on the other, to continue the war at any cost. And even though you have determined that this attack was not a provocation, the truth is that, in all likelihood, we still have a few more to experience. Secondly, the blame for any tragedy that happens from now on in Ukrainian territory, and in fact, also for those that happened before today. Actually, it's not the Russian Federation that's to blame, as strange as that may sound, but rather, on one hand, Ukraine itself, and on the other hand, NATO. Of course, the European Union, especially because the only solution to this problem, and the only way to stop these tragedies, whether they are caused intentionally or accidentally, is to end the war. And the Russian Federation, no matter how much the Western media tries to claim otherwise, does want to do it, but wants to do it in a definitive and final way, which, with the involvement of the European Union and the Kiev regime in this conflict, seems absolutely impossible. Don't take my word for it, just look at the footage. I told you at the beginning of this video that Volodymyr Zelensky is currently in Sweden, and he's not there, simply to ask for more money and talk about how poor he is and how much help he needs. But to sign a contract for the delivery of, listen, 150 Swedish JAS Gripen E fighter jets. We're talking, of course, not about an immediate delivery, and that's what the Prime Minister of Sweden clarified, with whom Volodymyr Zelensky did indeed sign the contract in question. But it's about a long-term collaboration, looking ahead 10 or even 15 years. In other words, exactly how long do they think they're going to keep prolonging this war, and how many victims, collateral damage, setups, provocations, victims of any kind. Ultimately, are they going to fall before they sign peace, which is clearly as necessary as it is inevitable? I mean, with each passing day, without the West, well, let's say Ukraine, signing a definitive peace with the Russian Federation, not just a mere freezing of the front line or a temporary truce. I repeat, definitive peace. It's basically yet another occasion in which the Kiev regime itself, and therefore Ukraine itself, and therefore NATO itself, put Ukrainian citizens in danger. Unfortunately, children included. Yes, once again, Ukraine attacking its own people. Here, some people might come to me with the argument that in that case, the Russian Federation could simply leave Ukrainian territory. And that's it? But we already know that it's not that easy, and that if Russia leaves, it will continue to suffer attacks from NATO from Ukrainian territory. This war will never end. And if Ukraine doesn't care about its children or its security, Russia does. It defends its own, and it knows that, unfortunately, as of today, this can only be achieved in military terms. However, from Ukraine, this is something they absolutely refuse to acknowledge. Recently, Nadine Merzelensky, after this failed and absolutely embarrassing meeting for him with Donald Trump, she said they were fighting against a great country, and for a moment, it even seemed like she was coming to her senses.
And against a great country that's against us. I think we have to stop it. But
the truth is that his statements today contradict those first ones. He calls it Russian disinformation, in particular, the fact that the Russian Federation is winning this war, with the real possibility that Ukraine could end up winning it.
Win this war that they are winning, but it's not true. They have losses, more than 1 million people, 1,300,000, that's it. And their economy is decreasing.
NATO, particularly the European Union, is urged on by Zelensky in this warlike madness. Weapons and more weapons. Now we're talking about Swedish planes. And what if we could give an example of this? In a colloquial way, to somehow describe the situation that is happening right now in Ukrainian territory, it's kind of like imagining parents who live in a house and who get along. Whether it's drinking, or yes, maybe other kinds of activities, let's say, somewhat harmful. And do they usually smoke inside the house? Yes, with the children inside. Well, from doing it so much, and even though they've been warned countless times not to do it, that it could be dangerous, that they should come to their senses, they kept going, stubborn as ever, believing they were smarter than everyone and could do anything. Handle it perfectly. Any consequence of smoking so much while being drunk, the house set on fire, the parents and the children are inside. And here it's perfectly clear that the outcome of this situation is unique and inevitable. We could even say it's as unique as it is inevitable that the house will end up burning down. The parents, however, for some reason only they know, keep themselves and therefore their children locked inside the house. Thinking and truly believing, and convincing the little ones of the same, that they're going to be saved, that the house can still be put out, and ultimately, the whole family witnessing an absolute tragedy with the flames directly falling right down on their heads. Meanwhile, the parents, half drunk and half crazed, keep repeating that victory is still yet to come. Well, this is actually exactly what's happening right now in Ukrainian territory, in the Ukrainian conflict in particular. What the Kyiv regime should do, and here we are reaching this third point, which, from my humble point of view, if you'll pardon the redundancy, is the most important one. If they really valued the lives of their civilians, especially their children, they should recognize reality as it is, that they have no option against the Russian Federation, and act accordingly. In other words, the only way to avoid these civilian tragedies is for the Kyiv regime to accept reality, and from there, start working to actually achieve a lasting peace, a final peace with the Russian Federation. In the meantime, everything else will simply prolong the suffering of its own citizens. And the million-dollar question is whether they will be able to do it in Ukraine, and therefore, in NATO. I'm Liu Sivaya, a geopolitical analyst and war correspondent in Donbass. Follow me so you don't miss the latest news, both geopolitical and about the Ukrainian conflict, so you never get fooled, because we're here to analyze the facts in the most objective way possible.